Hello everybody, this is ManuS recording for EternalTitans.com with another Eternal Top Decks video series for you guys. Today I got something a bit unexpected for you, although a lot of people have caught wind of it by now through my stream or some other way. Shimmerpack is back. Last Shimmerpack video series has been, I checked, more than a year ago. I think it was April 2017, if I remember correctly. So almost 1.5 years since Shimmerpack was worth talking about. But it's back, and the merchants Offset 4 made it possible. So finally time to bring you Shimmerpack version 3. Just like version 2, this was a great cooperation work between RrbbTT and me, working on the deck together and getting it up to speed, and we, or at least me by now, believe that it is the by far best deck in the format right now. I didn't expect this when I started working on the deck. I basically only started working on the deck because RrbbTT brought it up and played it a bunch. I had an updated version with that 4 build that I barely played because I didn't have much hope for it, because I felt like the whole strategy kind of is probably just too weak at its core with all the small fragile units that it used to play to become viable again. But oh boy, was I wrong. And yeah, RrbbTT and I compared notes and started going from there, and arrived at an 80 card list that we both can agree on and are very happy with and impressed by. He finished rank 1 at the end of last season with the deck and is again doing really well with it, so am I. And I think he was rank 1 in the beginning of the season and now is messing around with some other stuff and dropped a bunch. Because we are basically done figuring out the deck, so as long as we don't care about winning, we just usually explore other stuff. But yeah, at the end of the season, when I care about my rank for the final standings, I'll definitely go back to Shimmerpack. Anyway, time to show you the deck list and talk about the card choices. As a side note, Sunny and Moosh played it last ETS, did not manage to top 8. Not exactly sure what went wrong. Maybe they had some bad luck or bad matchups or made some mistakes, not sure. Deck is definitely not the easiest to play if you haven't played it in a long time or never played it. And there are some things that you might need to learn to properly pilot the deck. And some other guy that has been really liking the deck on my stream when I was playing it, on Tamu I think is his name, also won the Friday tournament with a bit older version of this that he got from my stream. So the deck is already starting to succeed and show up elsewhere. And I think one of the rank star guys covered it in a video, falsely assuming that Sunnyvale or Moosh built it, but in fact it was RrbbTT and me. And I just gave it to Sunny and Moosh because I've been telling my team this is by far the best deck in the format, and if you want to win, that's the deck you should be playing. Alright, let's talk about the deck. Unit base for Initiative Descents, not much explanation needed. Basically a stock card in any of these mid-rangey token style time decks with Obelisk, because makes you faster, is a body for Obelisk, also makes it faster and easier to hit the Obelisk threshold of 8 power for the double buff. Fortunately is favored, also been basically a mainstay in this deck since its inception, way back in the day when I think Finkel was the one that originally invented Shimmerpack in closed beta, I think. Just a free body for Obelisk, Shimmerpack and stuff, while still providing you the critical amounts of power the deck needs. For Teacher of Humility, not much explanation needed. The new best time card. Great 2-drop, offense and defense. The Infiltrate sometimes just randomly wins you the game, and at worst, if it connects, puts the opponent at a significant disadvantage and often gives you a free card while giving the opponent a card that is so expensive that they might never play it. So a 2-cost 3/3 that causes problems for the opponent and replaces itself potentially is really, really powerful. Temple Scribe, also a mainstay in the deck and not much explanation needed. Typical time token decks. Love Temple Scribe because it's a body that replaces itself, gives you health in the process to buy you some time. This is the core part of the deck basically, 8 merchants. This allows the deck to run Shimmerpack and Crystallize without ever drawing into them when they are bad, because both of these cards are very powerful but also very situational and expensive, so you don't want to draw them early and you don't want to draw them in the wrong situations. But old lists usually had like 2 of each in the main deck. This deck gets to run 8 ways to access them, so 4 times as likely to have them when it wants them, but 0% chance to have them when you don't want them, which is the best way to have it really. Have them every time you need them, and don't see them when they would be a liability. But they do more than that. Aurelian Merchant is also a great blocker at 1/4 for 3, among others against opposing Teachers of Humility, for example. It also accelerates you further towards your top end and Obelisk and Shimmerpack. And another critical thing that she does is she provides you with additional obelisks. Normally the deck only gets to run 4 obelisks. Thanks to Aurelian Merchant, it virtually gets to run 7 obelisks with 1 in the market. That's one of the bigger things that RrbbTT pointed me towards, because my list had 4 obelisks main, because I felt like without having played the deck basically, that the market slot might be better used for other utility stuff, and you gonna want to get Shimmerpack anyway, so having 2 buff things, Obelisk and Shimmerpack, that do similar things seemed like a redundancy to me, but I was very wrong about that. Obelisk is so important and often better than Shimmerpack, and you always want to have Obelisk, but you only sometimes want to have Shimmerpack, and you want to have Shimmerpack way later, and so on and so forth. So Aurelian Merchant number 1 is almost always going to get the Obelisk, even if you already have an Obelisk in hand, because you barely can have too many Obelisks. So yeah, that's the big deal about Aurelian Merchant. And Yennefer Merchant is a nice offensive body in your more aggressive draws in some matchups where you just go like Teacher into Yennefer Merchant, giving you a decent aggressive curve. It also survives sweepers like Hailstorm and Harshwool, which is a nice benefit. And while it's the worst body overall in the context of the deck, the blue market options are way, way better than time. That's the main weakness of Aurelian Merchant. The card is so good, but the market options are among the worst. Together with like the Fire Merchant, I would say. They're both like pretty lackluster in terms of their market utility, while Yennefer Merchant has great market utility. It can get 4 out of 5 cards and 2 really powerful Primal only cards in Unseal to protect you from said Harshwool and some other powerful big cards, and Crystallize to end games or swing games in your favor, so you can end them a turn or 2 later. Then we have Archive Curator. This usually was Praxis Displacer in older lists, because they were a bit more dependent on playing a tempo game and stuff. But Displacer is a bit tricky. It's not that great in a fair share of matchups right now. There's a lot of good summon effects that you don't really want to bounce, for example, and it's much worse against aggro than Curator, for example. The main matchup, like, it's decent against mid-range, but the body itself is not that great against mid-range, and in the end you have tempo plays for mid-range, but it is still a good option. But RrbbTT and I both lean towards Curator being better. There's a lot of good abilities that you need to silence. You don't want to lose to flyers, so having a 4 health flying blocker that blocks most common flyers in the game is really valuable, and then silencing another flyer if they have multiples is also really good. It still pops Aegis the same way as Displacer does, for example. It's a less aggressive body, but it's also a much better blocker against aggressive decks, for example, like the Skycrack deck that I discussed in my last video series, and so on and so forth. But I couldn't fault anyone for trying Displacer. We haven't really tried it much because Curator performed as well as we expected and hoped, but sure, sometimes the body is a bit low impact because it's really not a pressuring card. It's a very utilitarian defensive card, while Displacer pushes tempo and aggression more with cards like Teacher and Merchant, for example. A curve of Teacher, Merchant, Displacer, for example, is a pretty scary curve in the right situation. So feel free to give that a try if you want, but we have not regretted the choice of Curator so far, and we're fairly certain that Curator is at least a bit better than Displacer, because it's a bit safer and more versatile, and gives you more ways to deal with cards that might otherwise make you lose a game. That's one of the few uncertainties or like flexibilities of this list, since with most slots we are super confident and super happy. And yeah, then we have Sandstorm Titan, also a go-to staple of these kinds of time decks, and just way too good to not play, both on offense and defense, and also to keep up with flying pressure and opposing Titans and stuff like that. Then we have the removal suit of 4 Permafrost and 3 Equivocate and 8 Merchants, so the deck has virtually 15 ways to draw a removal spell, or removal-like spell, which is really great, in addition to the silences. Without ever really flooding on removal, since Equivocate can also be used to save your own units, even though it randomly transforms them, but you can still basically trade your Equivocate with an opposing removal, with the downside of side grading the thing you're saving. And 4 Permafrost is such a low number of situational removal that even against control, where they might be completely blank, you have 8 Merchants to just trade them away and turn them into valuable cards again, making this deck very consistent and basically never having like dead or situationally useless cards in your hand. Then the remaining 3 Obelisks with the Force in the market, as I said. Then we have the 2 Find Away. They're pretty innocuous, but they're also pretty stellar and very important. These used to be more Humbug swarms in the beginning, but we both had some issues with power in the deck, since 29 is just a bit ambitious even with the Merchant and Initiate, because they can die or be silenced, and also if you miss a power drop while accelerating, the acceleration doesn't do anything, because you're not accelerating, you're just making up for missing power. So that's also not the point, and you really want to get to 8 for Obelisk and Shimmerpack, for example, and to 6 for Party. So, and RrbbTT wasn't the biggest fan of a lot of Humbug swarms either in the past, and I agree, they are a bit tempo inefficient, and having too many swarms and parties can be a bit clunky, especially if you don't have an Obelisk out. So I was open to cutting some, and yeah, we wanted to get more power in the deck anyway. He said that he thinks the right number is between like 31 and 32, which didn't seem unreasonable, especially in a deck with 8 Merchants, where you can always exchange spare power for business, so it's not like you are likely to flood, and the deck really wants 8 power most games, so only the 9th power is getting fairly useless for the deck usually. And even then, that's often backup power in case one of your accelerants gets silenced or killed, so you still maintain your Obelisk buff or can still Shimmerpack if you need to. And yeah, we started with Ember Acolyte, because that's kind of like the old go-to. Didn't want to play too many, because we already have 8 3-drops, and you want to keep a smooth curve and not make your deck too clunky. And RrbbTT kept complaining about Acolyte feeling really, really bad these days, since a 2-1 for 3 is just so much behind the curve. Basically the stats of a 1-drop, that it feels really, really weak to play it, especially on curve. I think it's fine if you play it later, and you can sometimes manage to do that, but if you actually have to play it on curve to hit your force power, for example, it's really, really bad. And the deck didn't really have issues getting enough bodies for Obelisk and Shimmerpack usually, so the gained body from Acolyte was also not that valuable, so he was leaning towards just playing 2 monuments or standards or something, just regular power that doesn't cost you as much of a time investment to get, and has some utility added to it as well. I tried that briefly, but didn't like it too much, because the deck actually really wants to get to 8, so when all you want to do is draw that 8's power for your Obelisk, and then you draw that Temple's tactic or whatever, because you had 7 power, you feel pretty bad. Sure, Temple tactic can be nice sometimes, it can recycle or save some of your utility cards, or generate some tempo, bouncing a big blocker and stuff like that, but ultimately a lot of these scenarios drawing just a power source would have been a lot better, so that only partially solved the problem that we had. So thinking about it a bit more, I came up with Find a Way, inspired by the Elysian Combre deck of Andrew Beckstrom that I tuned prior and made a video about, where Find a Way was really great for hitting your power drops and feeding your merchants. And in this deck, this is even more true. The deck wants more power. The Combre deck wanted like 6 power and had Elysians and Find a Ways as additional payoffs for this. This deck wants to hit 8 power and has 8 merchants to feed. Because the other thing with the merchants is, I found myself way too often merchanting away decent cards for better cards rather than merchanting away cards that I don't need, or like spare power, for example. So I felt like there's some room to maximize there, and Find a Way does both greatly. The deck has enough power to usually not needing to use them early on. It's more like a mid-game play to get to like your high power counts, to get to your scouting party or your Obelisk and Shimmerpack type stuff. And before that, it does a very unique thing. It provides you 2 cards from 1 card slot, or like 1 draw step, which is very valuable in a deck with 8 merchants that just care about having as many cards in hand as possible to exchange with them. So getting 2 merchant activations from 1 draw step, for example, from a Find a Way is very, very good. And this card basically serves both of these roles. It's great fodder for your merchants, and also a great way to ensure hitting 8 power. This card feels really good when you're at 6 power and you just draw it and you play both parts, because you have played most of the rest of your hand anyway. You just want to get your Obelisk active or have a Shimmerpack in hand that you want to play, and then you can just double Find a Way, play the power, go to 7, next turn, drop the 8's power, get your Obelisk active. Everything's smooth sailing. So I've done anything with this card, from playing both parts for power, or never spending a single power on any half and just tossing both to 2 merchants and getting 2 market cards out of 1 single draw step. I can't emphasize enough how great the card works in this deck in all its aspects. So I can only recommend to keep the card and not replace it with the poor and underpowered Amber Acolyte in comparison. They're both clunky, but Find a Way does a lot more and is much more powerful in the deck than Amber Acolyte. And yeah, then there's still 2 Humbug Swarm left. They're still pretty good. They're additional flyers, they're additional multi-units from 1 card, which is great against sweepers. It's great to pressure in the air or defend in the air with Obelisk backup. And then last but not least, we have Scouting Party. The card is still really powerful, just harder to find the right home for it, but in a deck like this, it's still the powerhouse that it has always been, and regularly ends games either on its own or after a sweeper as a reload, or backed by, say, a Crystallize or Obelisk or Shimmerpack. Just a really, really powerful card. If this draws 2 to 4 cards, that usually is enough to win the game. Another thing that I wanted to point out that I think is a big strength of the deck is the removal suit. Permafrost can shut down anything that doesn't have endurance. Aegis doesn't count because Aegis is a problem for any removal really, but anything that doesn't have endurance can easily be shut down, and if something has endurance you can still always silence it with Curator and then Permafrost it. And Equivocate can just get anything out of the way temporarily, period. Even if it has endurance. It's a great answer to Titan. Titan used to be a big problem for this deck because it usually automatically stalled out the game, and then you would need to either have Polymorph if you played it at the time, or just stall out, get enough Obelisk or Shimmerpack and win that way. Now you can just bounce their Titan, hit them again, and then they get a mediocre, weaker 4-drop that cannot compete with your Titan, otherwise you get these Titan standoffs. Also, it's fast, that's another big payoff to protect you from combat tricks, blow out opponents left and right. Just a super versatile card. The fact that it's not a 1-for-1 because they still get a random 4-drop back is usually not a problem, because the cards they get will be much weaker usually than what you bounce, and the tempo gain is very massive. So that's one of the big strengths of the deck. The deck is very good at dealing with anything that is annoying, at least temporarily, and in a very tempo efficient manner. That's also why Teacher is really good in this deck, because if you get to attack turn 3, it's very, very easy to connect thanks to Permafrost and Equivocate, making it really, really hard for any opponent to defend against Teacher. They basically need to have a removal, otherwise you're gonna infiltrate usually. And then we have the power base, 25 power, 12 duels as usual, and the usual 8-5 turned into an 8-2 and 3 Diplomatic Seal, simply because the deck doesn't need that much Primal. Diplomatic Seals still provide Primal, not as reliable, but still well enough. But what they do is they up the amount of potential time sources for Teacher, which is very critical, because any turn past turn 2, Teacher becomes a lot weaker. So if you have to Talir's Favored to play Teacher, then Teacher will happen on turn 3, which is making it a lot harder for Teacher to connect, and a lot easier for the opponent to also just have removal or the power to play a removal. And yeah, Diplomatic Seal brings you up to 15 turn 1 time sources for Initiative Descents, which is also very important. In the past, before Crest of Wisdom existed in the last version, the deck usually just had 4 Diplomatic Seal, 8 Time Sigils, and 4 Seed and 5 Primal Sigil. But by now, basically, the 4 Diplomatic Seal in decks that don't have a lot of 1-drops are replaced by Crests. But in this deck, it makes sense to just basically replace 1 Seal and 3 Primal Sigils with the Crest to keep the same amount of Primal, but barely lose any early time and cement the early time for Teacher and Temple Scribe. I could see an argument for like playing only 2 Seal and cutting 1 Seal for, say, a Primal Sigil to make Seeds a bit better in the power, slightly smoother, and increase the chance of top decking second Primal for Crystallize or Shimmerpack later, for example. But I haven't really had any problems with that so far, and you also have to find a way, so the deck has like virtually 17 plus 2 find a way 19 Primal sources, 2 of them being guaranteed double Primal if you want to, even though it's 19 to 21 soft Primal. So yeah, power base has been working really well. Third Diplomatic Seal is up for discussion if you want to, but mainly only to make the Seeds slightly smoother, because they sometimes are a bit clunky early on. But keep in mind you still have Find a Way and Talir's Favorite to make Seed a ready source after turn 2. So if you can say play a depleted power turn 1, a ready power turn 2 for Find a Way or Talir's Favorite, for example Diplomatic Seal, then you get your Sigil, and then you can play the Seed that you have in your hand on turn 3 ready anyway. So it's only a minor issue, but and cutting a Seal for a Sigil to make Seeds a bit better for Initiate also means you lose 1 Seal for Initiate. I guess you could also just cut the third Seal for Time Sigil. That's also not bad, because then you have 16 plus the Find a Ways, which is still a very good number for Primal here. So basically, if you want to make your turn 1 Initiates and your turn 2 ready Seeds better, cutting a seal for Time Sigil if you want to make your Primal and your seeds a bit better, and probably your turn 1 initiate slightly worse, then cut a seal or a Sigil for Primal Sigil. And the market at the end is also perfect the way it is. There's no room for any adjustment really, because everything here is super important. The Equivocate means your merchants have enough utility and you have always access to a card helping you deal with something that you might otherwise lose to, so the Equivocate is very critical. This used to be Sandstorm Scarf before the nerf to Evolution, because you really desperately needed it to not get crushed in the air by TJP Elysian, but with that not being a thing anymore, Sandstorm Scarf could go, since with Curators, Titan and the removal and Humbug Swarm, your defenses against flyers are more than enough against the usual deck. Problem with Evolution was that Permafrost also was not a card, so that couldn't help on that front either. And they had Aegis and so on, and the units were really big flyers, so Curator and Swarm were only jump blockers. But yeah, against the usual flyers, now you don't need Scarf anymore. So there was finally room to fit Equivocate, because that was like the 6th market card we wanted that we couldn't fit before. It used to be in the main deck. Then Unseal, very important to deal with Harsh Rule and a bunch of other random things. Force Obelisk, as I explained earlier, very, very important for consistency of the deck. Crystallize, situationally great, wins about as many games as Obelisk and Shimmerpack against other unit decks, because on 8 it's happens a fair share that you go Yennefer Merchant into Crystallize in one turn, rather than setting up Shimmerpack, for example. Since if you have an Obelisk already, your board's usually big enough and Crystallize just wins the game. And last but not least, the Shimmerpack, which is sometimes a better fetch in the late game than Obelisk. If you have a board without Obelisk, for example, then getting Shimmerpack gives a lot of your units, your small units with like 1 attack, for example, plus 3 attack, while Obelisk would only give plus 2, and so on. It also might downgrade some opposing blockers and so on. So there's a fair share of situations where this is better than getting Obelisk or Crystallize, either when your board is too weak or weaker than it would be weaker with Obelisk than with Shimmerpack and so on. Initially I thought the card might not even be needed anymore, but after playing a bunch it showed that there's still plenty of scenarios where Shimmerpack is the go-to fetch with market. The 6th card that I would want in the market would be a Humbug Swarm or Scouting Party, because that's the one thing the market cannot do. There's no market target that generates board. But the deck is really good at generating board, so you usually don't need that. And like I said, all these cards are super critical. Do not touch the market. It's very well crafted. Cutting any of these cards for anything else is going to make the deck significantly worse. We discussed this at length and both agree that there's zero flexibility in this market, because each of these cards plays super critical roles and is not replaceable by anything. I would opt for Humbug Swarm simply to make Aurelian Merchant a bit more versatile, because that's the least versatile, because mostly you get Obelisk and then it can get removal, and other than that you can basically just get Shimmerpack when it's good to get Shimmerpack. It doesn't have a lot of utility, so being able to get Humbug Swarm, even though it's weaker than Scouting Party, would be nice. Sure, Scouting Party is the stronger card, so having more Scouting Parties is nice, but also having more Primal only targets just overtaxes Yennefer Merchant, and then you will never be able to use as many of the options as you have, while your Aurelian Merchant might sometimes just not even get you anything useful anymore. So it's important if you play 2 or more merchants in one deck that you balance your market so both merchants have enough good stuff to get on average in every situation, because otherwise one merchant might be useless half the time and the other one just has more utility than he can ever realistically use in a game. Okay. This is, if you ask me, by far the best deck in the game right now. I've been super impressed by it. I've been crushing the event with it and doing really well on ladder with it. I think over the event I had a 15, 16 win streak at some point. I started the first event with a loss, then went 9-0, and then started the second event and think I went like 5 or 6-0 until my first loss. I think I lost to Mulligan on stream when I was 5-0 or 6-0. I'm not sure anymore. But yeah, and RrbbTT also reported to me at some point that on ladder he was casually on a like 13 win streak at some point. Not sure when that win streak ended, but yeah, the deck is just really good, and you'll see that in the games later, hopefully. Okay, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this very thorough walkthrough of the deck and in-depth explanation of all the card choices. This is basically a very well-tuned final product. RrbbTT and I are very happy with the list, and it is performing exactly as we would hope. So hope this serves everyone out there as well as it does us. And yeah, crush the ladder. Deck is not so easy to play though, so don't expect to just win right out of the gates. You might need to do some practicing with the deck and learn the ins and outs to really crush people. But the deck has all the tools and power to do so if you pilot it properly. And as usual, gonna hop into some games and ranked in the roughly top 20 right now and show it to you in action. So stay tuned for the first game in a moment. Thanks for watching.